What's up guys, this is Professor Spawn. In this tutorial we are going to learn about functions and what are functions in Kotlin and what are their importance, right? So before we move ahead, what I'm going to do is inside this Kotlin package I'm going to create a new package named as functions. So I'm creating a new package inside this, and now once I create this package functions, I will create a new Kotlin class file and I will have this as functions demo. So let me write that functions demo, and I've created a functions demo.kt file here. So what is a function? Functions can be thought of, a block of code that does a desirable operation. So let's say, for example, you have a car, right? And the brake has its own function. When you apply a brake, it does some function, and your car comes to a halt, or there is a gear which does its own function. In the same way, when you write a software, you write small pieces of functions that does your desirable operation. In the same way, Kotlin has functions. The on the top view, it will be a class, right? You write a class, and inside the class there will be functions which interacts with each other or does its independent operation and gets you an output. So let's define function, because we have seen functions in the past which we write main function, right? That is also a function. To write a function, you prefix this with fun, and the next thing is the name of the function. Let's write one function called as add numbers. So I'm writing this function, and what I will do here in this function is I will create one variable called as z, and rather not z, I will call this as sum, and I will have 5 plus 4, right? And I'm going to print this function. I'm going to print this sum. So let me print this. So, and now let's create a main function here, okay? And in this from this main function, I'm going to call this add numbers, right? So this is your, when you run this code, right, when you run this file, this is where your code execution will start, and inside this I'm going to call this add numbers function. So what will happen is when you run this code right here, this will give you an output as 9, because in the main function you are calling this function, and when the function execution will come to this point, it will compute the sum as 5 plus 4, and it will print the sum, right? If you see here in this method, this 5 and 4 is actually hard coded, and no matter how many times you run this function, this will always give you an output of 9. But let's say that you want to add numbers which user provides, right? How do you do that? That you can do it with a function that accepts arguments, right? So here if you see in this add numbers, we have 5 and then 4. So basically addition is happening between two numbers. So we can think like the addition is happening between two variables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function called as add numbers, with params. Or rather, I will have this add numbers, and I'm going to have x as one variable and y as another variable. So if you see here, you have passed two variables. Rather, in programming term it is called as arguments, or it is called as parameters. So you have passed two parameters, x and y. If you see here in the lint, this says parameter x, and if you see here, you'll see the lint as parameter y. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print the sum just like above, but instead of hard coding the values, I will pass x plus y. Now once I do that, I'm going to print this sum. Now what is the advantage of this? Now you can call this no matter how many times with your own arguments. This time I will pass it as 5,2. And if you see here, this accepts no arguments or no parameters, and this accepts as the parameters. So when the code is run, let me comment this up. When the code is run, this will call this function, right? So let's run this function, and if you see, it will output the sum as 7. Now this time you can pass 5 plus 5, and this will give you the output as 10. So the functions can accept no argument, or the functions can accept your arguments. That all depends on your desired operation, the operation you want to do, right? Now if you see here, this function takes the argument and just print the sum. But what about those functions which compute your desirable operation and returns the operation value? How do you do that in Kotlin? So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm again going to create a function, add numbers, return, I will have add numbers, and I'm going to again have x as an int and y as an n, right? The Kotlin will give me an error because the two parameters are same, right? So you cannot have two functions with same name along with the same parameter. You need to change the name, right? You can have two functions with the same name but different parameters, but you cannot have two functions with same name and same parameter. Just remember that, right? So I'm going to name this as add number, and here what I will do is I'm going to compute the sum, and I will have this x plus y. Once I get the sum, I'm going to return sum. As this function is returning the sum, the lint is telling me that the return type is unit. If you see here, the required is unit but found int, because this is returning an int type. How do you return some value from a function, or the type of value from a function? As this is returning an int, you need to give the return type as :int. The colon will come after the brackets, right, after you define the parameters. And just like how you define variable, you need to define this colon and the type of the variable. Now let's call this function. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run this code, and once this code is run, you won't see any output because you need to print that. Now instead of printing inside a function, I'm returning the value, and I'm going to print that value here, right? So let's run this code. When you run this code, you will have the output as 10, because it calls this function, it computes the sum, and it returns the sum value inside this main function, and here the value is printed as 10. Just remember that, guys. Along the same lines, it can also accept this nullable type of variable, which I'm going to show you. So in Kotlin, there is a, let's define one variable called as first name, and I'm going to name this as spawn. Now let's reassign this variable to, let's say, null. And now the compiler will throw an error, and it will say that the variable you have defined is of non-null type, and you are reassigning a variable with a value of null. That is not allowed. If you want to define a variable that can hold null values, you need to define it explicitly in Kotlin. And to define it explicitly, you need to give the type, right? As this holds string, you need to give this string, but you need to suffix this with question mark. This will tell Kotlin that the variable first name is of type string, and it can accept null value, right? And now it can accept the null value. But now let's say that you want to print the length of the string, right? As string is a class, there are certain functions inside it, and you can access it. In the same way, there is this length a field inside the string class, which will tell us that how many characters are there. Here, as it is 5, but now if you see here, it is giving me an error. Compiler is giving me an error, and it's saying that you cannot directly access the length field because the first name is of nullable type, and there are chances that we will get here as a null value, right? So to avoid this error, the Kotlin has a mechanism of handling this null pointer exception. This is how the Kotlin handles the null pointer exception, and I believe that this is one of the main advantages of Kotlin over Java, where you can get the hood of, or get the jinx of the null pointer happening in your code at the compile time itself. Now to handle this error, you just need to call it safely, which is a concept called as safe call, and to use that safe call, you just need to have this question mark dot here. This is calling safely this length method. So let's run this code. When I run this code, I will have the output as 10, and then again I will have the value as null. So what does this did is, as the variable is reassigned to null, it didn't give me a null pointer exception. Instead, it gave me the length value as null, right? But let's say that you assert this, rather you explicitly tell Kotlin that, okay, this first name will never be a null. I'm asserting that. This is what this to exclamation does. So when you run this code here, you will get a Kotlin null pointer exception, as this first name is null. Here you will get the null dot length, right? It's like you're finding the length of something which doesn't even exist. So that is not possible. So you need to use safe call in Kotlin, right? This will help you in mitigating this null pointer exception. And let me tell you that null pointer exception is also known as a $1 billion exception, because this costs billions of dollars every year to the companies, and it's very difficult to find this null pointer exception. But Kotlin has a beautiful mechanism where you can handle that in compile time, right? So this is one way. Or let's say that instead of null, you want when this variable is null, you want the length to return to some other value, right? So how do you do that? For that, Kotlin has this special operator called as always operator. So to use always operator, you need to use question mark colon, and I'm going to type here as -1. So what does this mean is, if the first name variable is not null, return the length. If it is null, return -1, right? So anything at the right hand side of this always operator, if it is null, then only then it will return that value, else it will return the length. So let's run this code here, and if you see, this time the output is not null, instead it is -1, right? This will help you to handle these scenarios efficiently. But now let me comment this null, right? And if you see, when I run this code again, you will see the output as 5. So this is the beauty of Kotlin, and I think this is why the Kotlin will flourish, because it is like the improvement over Java. So in the next tutorial, we will start off with the classes, and we will start off with what are constructor, and then we will move ahead with the deeper topics in Kotlin. See you in next tutorial, guys. Goodbye.